The mining drills stopped working at exactly 3 in the afternoon, and that was when everyone on Dust Rock Station knew something big was coming. The machines never stopped unless there was real trouble, and real trouble usually meant pirates, or worse. Workers dropped their tools and looked up at the gray sky, squinting through the artificial atmosphere dome that kept them all breathing. What they saw made no sense at all. A ship was descending through the clouds, but it wasn't like any ship they had ever seen before. It moved like a living thing, twisting and flowing through the air with grace that no human-built vessel could match. The hull looked like it was made of dark metal and something else, something that shifted colors from deep purple to silver as it caught the light. "Is that a dragon?" whispered Maya, one of the younger miners. She had heard stories, of course. Everyone had, but seeing one in person was different. The ship landed in the main courtyard with barely a sound, even though it was easily 3 times the size of the biggest cargo hauler the station had ever seen. Steam rose from its surface as it cooled, and then a section of the hull simply melted away to form a ramp. What emerged first was a claw, then another. Then a massive head that belonged in ancient stories, not on a dusty mining station in the middle of nowhere. The dragon was enormous, easily 40 feet from nose to tail tip, with scales that seemed to contain their own light. Cybernetic implants ran along her neck and shoulders, glowing with soft blue energy that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. But what really caught everyone's attention was what she carried. Cradled gently in her front claws was a small human. Child, maybe 4 years old. He had messy brown hair and wore simple clothes that looked too big for him. The boy didn't cry or struggle or show any fear at all. He just sat there quietly, looking around with wide eyes that seemed to take in everything and nothing at the same time. Station Administrator Harris stepped forward on shaking legs. He was a practical man who dealt with quotas and supply shipments and worker complaints. He was not equipped to handle galactic royalty showing up on his doorstep. Your Majesty," he stammered, because even on a backwater mining station, everyone knew who Empress Karoleth was. She ruled 3 star systems and commanded fleets that could crack planets. We weren't expecting... "I do not announce my movements to mining administrators," the dragon said, and her voice was like distant thunder. But when she looked down at the child in her claws, her tone became gentle. "The child requires socialization. Your species builds places for this purpose, yes?" Harris blinked. Places for young ones to interact with others of their kind. To learn. To play. She gestured with her massive head toward the residential section of the station. "I have observed your colonies. You create spaces with equipment designed for juvenile entertainment and development." It took Harris a moment to realize she was talking about the playground, the little area near the housing blocks where the families let their kids run around after school, a few swing sets and climbing bars that the maintenance crew had welded together from scrap metal. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing like it for dozens of light years. "You want to use our playground?" Harris asked, still not quite believing. This was happening. "The child has been isolated," Karoleth explained. "He requires exposure to others. Your young ones are less intimidating than mine would be." She set the boy down carefully on the ground. He stood there for a moment, looking up at all the adults staring at him, then wandered over to examine a nearby mining cart. He ran his small hands along the metal frame, tracing the joints and hinges with obvious fascination. "What's his name?" asked Dr. Webb, the station's medical officer. She had 3 kids of her own and knew something was different about this one. The way he moved, the way he didn't seem to hear when people talked to him. "Tommy," Karoleth said. "He is special." That was an understatement. Tommy didn't respond to his name when people called it. He didn't make eye contact or smile at the other children who had started gathering at a safe distance. He seemed lost in his own world, one that nobody else could enter. But when Caroleth lowered her great head toward him, Tommy reached out without hesitation and touched her snout with both hands. It was the first real interaction anyone had seen from him, and the dragon's eyes actually seemed to soften. "He's not afraid of you," Harris observed. "Fear is learned," Caroleth replied. "Tommy has not learned it yet." Over the next hour, word spread through the station like wildfire. The Dragon Empress had come to use their playground. Families emerged from their quarters, children hiding behind their parents' legs as they got their first look at a real dragon. The adults were just as nervous, but they were trying to hide it better. Tommy wandered through the small crowd with complete indifference to the attention. He was more interested in the mechanical things around him. He spent 10 minutes studying how the door to the residential block opened and closed, running his fingers along the track it slid on. "Has he always been like this?" asked Beth Morrison, whose own son was about Tommy's age. She watched as Tommy ignored her boy's attempts to show him a toy spaceship. "Since I have known him," Caroleth said. Her voice carried a note of sadness. That surprised the humans. They hadn't expected a Dragon Empress to sound like a worried parent. "He is between things, neither fully one nor the other." "One or the other what?" Harris asked. Caroleth studied the administrator for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "That is not a simple question to answer." As the day wore on, Tommy finally made his way to the actual playground equipment. The other children watched from a distance as he climbed onto a swing, but instead of trying to make it move, he crouched down and examined the chains that held it up. He traced each link with his fingers, tested how they connected to the seat. "He's looking at it like a puzzle," observed Maya, who had been watching the whole scene unfold. "Everything is a puzzle to him," Caroleth said quietly. When evening came and the other families started calling their children in for dinner, Tommy was still at the playground. He had moved from the swings to the climbing structure, but he wasn't climbing it. He was lying on his back underneath it, staring up at how the metal bars connected to each other. "Will you bring him back tomorrow?" Harris asked as Caroleth gently picked up the boy. "If you will permit it." "Of course. He's welcome here any time." Harris paused. "Your Majesty, can I ask, why here? Why our station? There must be better places, more appropriate places for someone like him." Caroleth looked around at the simple playground, the modest housing blocks, the industrial equipment everywhere. It wasn't much compared to the palaces and academies she could have taken Tommy to on any of dozens of worlds. "Sometimes," she said, "the most appropriate place is the one where no one expects anything more than acceptance." That night, after the dragon ship had departed, the people of Dust Rock Station sat in their common areas and tried to process what had happened. Children who had been too shy to approach Tommy that day now boasted about how close they had gotten to a real dragon. Adults wondered what it meant that the most powerful being in 3-star systems had chosen their humble outpost for whatever Tommy needed. But in the maintenance bay, old Cal Peterson was thinking about something else entirely. He had watched that boy examine every piece of equipment he could get close to, and there had been something familiar about the way Tommy moved, the way he looked at mechanical things. Cal had been fixing machines for 40 years. He knew the look of someone who understood how things worked, even when they couldn't explain it. Tommy had that look, but there was something else there too. Something that didn't quite fit. Tomorrow, Cal decided, he was going to pay more attention to the Dragon Empress and her strange little boy. Because in his experience, when something didn't fit the way it should, there was usually a very interesting reason why. 3 days had passed since the Dragon Empress first brought Tommy to the playground, and the routine was becoming normal in the strangest possible way. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock, the biomechanical ship would descend from the gray sky and land in the courtyard. Karaleth would emerge with Tommy cradled gently in her claws, set him down near the playground, and then settle herself nearby to watch. The other children had stopped being afraid. Kids adapted faster than adults, and Tommy's complete lack of fear made him seem less dangerous somehow. They still kept their distance, but now it was more like the distance you kept from someone who was playing a different game than you, not someone who might hurt you. Tommy never played the same game as the other kids anyway. While they ran and shouted and climbed and swung, Tommy continued his careful examination of everything mechanical around him. He had worked his way through most of the playground equipment and was now studying the atmospheric processors that kept their little bubble of air stable in the harsh environment outside. Cal Peterson watched all of this from his workshop, which had the best view of the playground area. At 55, Cal had seen just about everything a mining station could throw at him. Broken drill bits, failed life support systems, quantum engines that decided to stop working for no apparent reason. He prided himself on being able to fix anything, given enough time and the right tools. But Tommy was starting to bug him, and not in a bad way. It was more like when you heard a noise in an engine that you knew meant something important, but you couldn't quite figure out what yet. On the 4th day, Cal decided to get a closer look. He waited until Tommy had settled in to examine the junction box that controlled the playground's lights. The boy was sitting cross-legged in the dirt, running his fingers along the cables that led in and out of the metal housing. His movements were slow and methodical, like he was reading something in the way the wires were arranged. "See something interesting there?" Cal asked, keeping his voice gentle. He had worked around enough scared kids to know how to approach carefully. Tommy didn't look up or acknowledge that Cal had spoken, but his fingers paused on a particular section of cable, and Cal noticed something that made him crouch down for a better look. The cable Tommy was touching was slightly loose in its connector. Not enough to cause problems yet, but enough that someone with sensitive fingers might feel the difference. Cal had been meaning to tighten that connection for weeks, but kept forgetting about it. "You feel that wiggle in there?" Cal asked. "That's going to be a problem someday if we don't fix it." Still no response from Tommy, but the boy's fingers moved to trace the exact path the loose connection would take if it failed completely. From the junction box to the main power relay to the residential block's backup systems. Cal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's recycled air. There was no way a 4-year-old could know about electrical load paths and backup systems. There was no way anyone could know that just from touching a cable. But Tommy's finger was now pointing directly at the backup relay housing, 40 feet away and hidden behind a maintenance panel. "How did you—" Cal started to ask, then stopped, himself. Tommy wasn't going to answer questions, but maybe he didn't need to. Cal spent the rest of the afternoon watching Tommy move around the playground area. Everywhere the boy went, he found small problems that Cal knew existed but hadn't gotten around to fixing. A loose bolt on the swing set, a seal that was starting to wear out in the water recycling system, a mounting bracket that had developed, a hairline crack. Tommy didn't try to fix any of these things. He just found them, examined them with his fingers and eyes, and then moved on, like he was conducting some kind of invisible inspection that nobody else could see. That evening, after Karaleth had taken Tommy back to her ship, Cal approached the Dragon Empress. Up close, she was even more intimidating than she looked from a distance. Her cybernetic implants pulsed with energy that Cal could feel in his bones, and her eyes held intelligence that was older and deeper than anything human. "Your Majesty," Cal said, because he figured politeness was probably important when talking to someone who could step on him without noticing. Can I ask you something about Tommy? You may ask, Karaleth replied. Her voice rumbled like distant engines. I may or may not choose to answer. That boy of yours has been finding mechanical problems all week. Things that are wrong with our systems. Small things, but he's finding them just by touch. How's he doing that? Karaleth studied Cal for a long moment. Her massive head tilted slightly, like she was trying to decide something important. What do you know of hybrid genetics, human? Cal blinked. That wasn't the kind of answer he had been expecting. Hybrid what now? Tommy is not entirely human, Karaleth said quietly. Nor is he entirely dragon. He is something that should not exist according to the science of both our species. The words hit Cal like a physical blow. He looked back toward the playground, where he could still see the small impressions Tommy's feet had left in the dirt. He's half dragon? The process was attempted long ago, when my people first encountered yours. Most subjects died. Those that survived were... She paused, searching for the right words. Incomplete. Mad. Unable to integrate the dual nature of their inheritance. But Tommy's not mad. No. But he is also not whole. His human mind protects itself by retreating from the dragon consciousness that tries to emerge. What you interpret as developmental delay is actually a form of psychological defense. Cal felt pieces clicking together in his mind like parts of a complex machine finally fitting into place. The way he examines things, that's not human behavior. Dragons understand. Technology on levels your species cannot comprehend. We see the relationships between all components of a system simultaneously. The flow of energy, the stress points, the failure modes. It is instinctive to us. Karaleth's voice carried a note of sadness. Tommy has this ability, but his human mind cannot process it properly. So he experiences it through touch, through careful observation, but cannot fully access the knowledge, like having the right tools but not knowing how to use them, Cal said. An apt comparison. Cal was quiet for a while, thinking through the implications. What happens if he can't integrate both sides? He will remain as he is, safe but limited. Never fully human, never fully dragon, never able to reach his potential in either form. And if he does integrate them? Karaleth's eyes flashed with something that might have been hope. He would be something new, something that has never existed before. A bridge between our species that could change everything. But you haven't been able to make it work. I have tried everything my people know. Ancient rituals, meditation techniques, technological interfaces. Nothing works. Tommy's human nature resists dragon awakening methods, and human psychology cannot handle dragon consciousness without preparation. Cal looked back toward the empty playground, then at his workshop, then at the dragon Empress who ruled star systems, and could probably destroy his entire station with a thought. Your Majesty, he said slowly, has anyone ever tried approaching this like an engineering problem? Karaleth's massive head turned to focus entirely on Cal. Explain. Well, it seems to me that you've got two systems that need to work together, but they're not compatible as they are. In my line of work, when you've got compatibility issues, sometimes you need an interface, something that helps one system talk to the other. You are suggesting technological assistance. I'm suggesting we figure out why the systems aren't talking to each other and then build something to help them communicate. Tommy's got dragon abilities trying to work through human neurology. Maybe what he needs isn't ancient dragon wisdom. Maybe he needs human engineering. Karaleth stared at Cal for a long time. Her cybernetic implants pulsed faster, and Cal got the distinct impression that he was being evaluated by an intelligence that could calculate the orbital mechanics of entire solar systems. Finally, she spoke. You would be willing to attempt this? Ma'am, I've been fixing incompatible systems my whole career. This might be the most interesting challenge I've ever had. And if you fail? If you damage him in the attempt? Cal thought about Tommy sitting in the dirt, tracing electrical pathways with his small fingers, seeing problems that nobody else could detect but unable to communicate what he found. Respectfully, Your Majesty, seems to me he's already damaged. Question is whether we can help him get better. That night, Cal stayed up late in his workshop, sketching diagrams and making notes. He didn't know much about dragon biology or hybrid genetics, but he knew plenty about systems integration and compatibility problems. Somewhere in Tommy's small body, two incompatible systems were trying to work together. Cal had built a career on making incompatible systems cooperate. For the first time since the Dragon Empress had arrived, Cal felt like he was looking at a problem he might actually be able to solve. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was working with. And that meant spending a lot more time observing Tommy, learning how his unique abilities worked, and figuring out why they weren't working better. Tomorrow, Cal decided, he was going to start treating Tommy like the most complex and important repair job of his career. 2 weeks into his unofficial study of Tommy, Cal had filled 3 notebooks with observations and still felt like he was missing something important. The boy's behavior wasn't random at all once you knew what to look for. Everything Tommy did followed patterns that reminded Cal of troubleshooting procedures he used on complex systems. When Tommy examined the playground equipment, he always started with the stress points, the joints that bore the most weight, the connections that handled the most movement. When he wandered around the station, he gravitated toward equipment that was running at the edge of its tolerances. The atmospheric processor that was due for maintenance. The gravity generator that had been making subtle vibrations for months. The power coupling that Cal knew would fail someday, but hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. Tommy found problems the way a scanner found metal. Automatically, without thinking about it, like he was built for it, which Cal was beginning to realize he probably was. He doesn't see machines the way we do, Cal explained to Dr. Webb over coffee in the station's small cafeteria. When I look at that drill over there, I see individual components: motor, power coupling, drill head, control systems. Tommy sees the whole thing as one connected system. Dr. Webb nodded thoughtfully. She had been observing Tommy, too, from a medical perspective. His brain scans are unusual, lots of activity in areas that normally don't develop until much later, in childhood, and some areas that don't typically show that kind of activity in humans at all. What kind of areas? Spatial processing, pattern recognition. There's also unusual connectivity between different brain regions, like his visual cortex is directly connected to parts of his motor planning system. Cal leaned forward. What would that do to someone? Theoretically, it might let them understand complex three-dimensional relationships just by looking at something. They could see how all the parts of a system connect and move without having to think through each connection individually. That sounds exactly like what Tommy's doing. It is. But the connections are unstable. They flicker in and out, like his brain can't maintain them consistently. And when they're active, they seem to overwhelm his normal language and social processing areas. Cal thought about this while watching Tommy through the cafeteria window. The boy was examining the seals around the airlock door, running his small fingers along the rubber gaskets that kept their atmosphere from leaking into space. To most people, it looked like meaningless fidgeting. To Cal, it looked like a professional inspection. Doc, what would happen if someone's brain was trying to process information in 2 completely different ways at the same time? Depends on how different. Minor differences, you might get some confusion, maybe headaches. Major differences. She shrugged. The brain would probably shut down the newer processing method to protect the older, more established ones. What If the newer method wasn't actually newer? What if it was just different? Dr. Webb studied Cal's face. You're thinking about what the Empress told you, about Tommy being a hybrid. I'm thinking that maybe Tommy's brain isn't damaged or delayed. Maybe it's trying to run two completely different operating systems at the same time, and they keep interfering with each other. That afternoon, Cal decided to try something new. Instead of just watching Tommy, he started working alongside him. When Tommy crouched down to examine the power coupling on the main mining rig, Cal crouched down next to him with his tools. See, this connection here, Cal said, pointing to the coupling Tommy had been studying. It's getting loose. Probably needs to be tightened before it causes problems. Tommy didn't respond verbally, but his fingers moved to trace the exact bolts that needed attention. Without any guidance, he pointed to the specific tool Cal would need from his kit. Yeah, that's the one, Cal said, pulling out the right wrench. You've got good eyes for this stuff. As Cal worked, Tommy watched intently. Not the way most kids watched adult work, with casual interest or boredom. Tommy watched like he was memorizing every movement, understanding not just what Cal was doing, but why it worked. When Cal finished tightening the coupling, Tommy immediately moved to the next potential problem area. A support bracket that had developed stress fractures from years of vibration. Again, Tommy's fingers found the exact spots where the metal was weakening. You can feel that, can't you? Cal asked. The places where things are getting ready to break. Tommy looked up at Cal for just a moment. Eye contact. Brief, but it was there. I think you understand a lot more than people realize, Cal continued, keeping his voice gentle. I think you see how all this stuff works together, but you can't tell anyone about it because the words don't come out right. Tommy's hand moved to rest on Cal's toolkit. His fingers traced the outline of each tool through the fabric, like he was cataloging their shapes and purposes. Over the next few days, Cal and Tommy developed an odd kind of partnership. Cal would bring his tools to whatever area Tommy was examining, and Tommy would guide him to problems that needed fixing. They didn't talk much, mostly because Tommy couldn't, and Cal had learned that sometimes quiet communication worked better anyway. But Cal was learning things about Tommy that nobody else had noticed. The boy's understanding of mechanical systems wasn't just intuitive, it was sophisticated. Tommy could predict failure cascades, identify weak points in complex chains of components, and even seemed to understand load distributions and stress patterns. It took Cal years of training to recognize. It's not possible, Dr. Webb said when Cal described what he was seeing. A 4-year-old brain doesn't have the development necessary for that kind of systems thinking. What if it's not a 4-year-old brain? Cal asked. What if part of it is something else? That evening, Cal approached Karoleth with a specific request. He wanted to understand dragon technology, how dragons thought about mechanical systems. What made their approach different from human engineering? Your species approaches technology through linear logic, Karoleth explained. You break complex problems into smaller pieces, solve each piece individually, then combine the solutions. This works, but it is slow and sometimes misses elegant solutions that require understanding the whole system simultaneously. And dragons? We perceive the entire system at once, all components, all connections, all energy flows, all potential failure modes. We see technology as living networks rather than collections of parts. Cal nodded slowly. Tommy does that. He sees the whole system. But he can't communicate what he sees because his human language centers don't know how to process that kind of information. Correct. And because he cannot communicate it, he cannot act on it effectively. The knowledge exists, but remains trapped. There's something else, isn't there? Cal asked. Something you haven't told me yet. Karoleth was quiet for a long moment. In dragon culture, full integration of technological consciousness requires a specific awakening process, a moment when all systems activate together and establish permanent connections. What kind of awakening process? The first flame. When a young dragon breathes fire for the first time, it triggers neurological changes that allow full access to technological intuition. Without this awakening, a dragon remains limited, never reaching full potential. Cal felt something cold settle in his stomach. And Tommy? Tommy possesses the biological mechanisms for fire breathing. The organs are present and properly formed, but they have never activated. His human nervous system does not trigger them the way a dragon's would. What happens if he never breathes fire? He remains as he is, partially functional in both aspects of his nature, but never fully integrated, never able to truly communicate what he perceives or act on his understanding in meaningful ways. Cal looked toward the residential area where Tommy was spending the night with one of the station families. The Hendersons had volunteered to look after him, and their daughter Emma had been patiently trying to teach Tommy to play with blocks. Has anyone ever tried to help a hybrid breathe fire before? Tommy is the first hybrid to survive long enough for the attempt. Previous subjects either died in infancy or never developed the neurological complexity necessary for integration. So we're making this up as we go along. Yes. Cal rubbed his face with both hands. Your Majesty, I need to know something. If we can't figure this out, if Tommy never integrates properly, what happens to him? He will live a long life. Hybrids age more slowly than humans. But he will always be isolated, always be different, always be alone in ways that neither fully human nor fully dragon individuals can understand. And if we do figure it out, then he becomes something new, something that has never existed, a being who can bridge the gap between our species and show both of our peoples possibilities we never imagined. That night, Cal sat in his workshop staring at his notebooks full of observations about Tommy. Somewhere in all of this information was the key to helping the boy achieve his full potential. The question was whether a middle-aged human mechanic had any business trying to solve a problem that involved alien biology and neurological processes nobody fully understood. But then Cal thought about Tommy's face when he found a mechanical problem, the way his eyes lit up with understanding that he couldn't share with anyone. The boy had knowledge trapped inside him that could benefit everyone around him, if only there was a way to let it out. Cal had spent his career making broken things work again. This might be the most important broken thing he had ever tried to fix. Tomorrow, he decided, he was going to start figuring out how to help a half-dragon child breathe fire for the first time in history. Medical scanners hummed to life in ways they were never designed for as Cal fed dragon physiological data into systems built to analyze human anatomy. Dr. Webb had volunteered her equipment after Cal explained what he was trying to do, though she still looked skeptical about the whole project. This is completely outside any established medical protocol, she warned for the third time that morning. Most interesting problems are, Cal replied, adjusting the scanner's parameters to account for non-human tissue density. Tommy, you doing okay in there? The boy lay perfectly still on the examination table, more patient than any 4-year-old had a right to be. The scanning array moved slowly around his small body, building a 3-dimensional map of his internal structure that no human doctor had ever seen before. What they found changed everything Cal thought he knew about biology. Tommy's anatomy was a masterpiece of impossible engineering. His lungs were larger than they should be, with additional chambers that connected to organs that had no names in human medicine. Specialized glands clustered around his throat and chest, connected by a network of vessels that pulsed with their own rhythm. Most remarkably, his nervous system showed dual pathways for almost every major function. He's got 2 complete sets of neural networks, Dr. Webb said, staring at the scan results. One that looks essentially human and another that follows. Completely different patterns. Cal studied the display, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The dragon network isn't connected properly to the human one, more like they're actively interfering with each other. Look at these readings around his brainstem. The signals are crossing and creating feedback loops. Cal traced the pathways with his finger on the screen. So when his dragon side tries to communicate with his fire-breathing organs, the signals get scrambled by his human nervous system. And when his human side tries to process language or social cues, the dragon pathways create interference. Dr. Webb shook her head. It's amazing he functions at all. He functions because he's found ways to route around the interference. When he examines mechanical systems, he's using his dragon intuition through pathways that don't conflict with human processing. But he can't access the full capabilities of either system. Cal spent the next 2 days studying the scans and comparing them to the dragon physiological data Karoleth had provided. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that this was fundamentally an engineering problem. Tommy had all the right components, but they weren't synchronized. Dragonfire wasn't just biological, Cal discovered. It was a controlled fusion reaction that required precise timing between multiple organ systems. The specialized glands had to release specific chemicals in exact sequences. The modified lung chambers had to achieve particular pressure differentials. The neural pathways had to coordinate it all with split-second timing. In a normal dragon, this happened instinctively. The nervous system was designed for it from birth. But Tommy's human neural patterns couldn't generate the complex, simultaneous signals required. His dragon organs were like a sophisticated engine connected to the wrong control system. What if we built him a better control system? Cal asked Dr. Webb over dinner in the station cafeteria. You mean like a pacemaker? More complex than that. A device that could read his intentions and translate them into the precise neural signals his dragon organs need. Something that bypasses the interference between his human and dragon nervous systems. Dr. Webb looked thoughtful. Theoretically possible, but incredibly dangerous. You'd be interfacing directly with his nervous system. One mistake could paralyze him or worse. And if we don't try, he stays the way he is. Cal looked through the cafeteria window at Tommy, who was sitting in the playground examining the molecular structure of a metal bolt with the kind of focused attention most adults couldn't maintain for 5 minutes. I've been thinking about what Karoleth said, about the first flame being a triggering event. What if it's not just about breathing fire? What if it's about proving to his nervous system that the dragon pathways can work? You mean like a successful test that convinces his brain to accept the dragon processing methods? Exactly. Right now, his human brain is protecting itself by suppressing the dragon systems because they seem chaotic and unreliable. But if we could help him breathe fire once, successfully and safely, maybe his brain would start integrating the two systems. Naturally. Dr. Webb was quiet for a long moment. You're talking about building a device that could fundamentally change how his brain works. I'm talking about building a device that lets his brain work the way it was meant to. That night, Callie worked until dawn designing the interface. It was unlike anything he had ever built before, requiring components from life support systems, quantum processors, and neural monitoring equipment. The device would need to read Tommy's brain activity, identify his intentions, and generate the precise neural stimulation patterns his dragon organs required. But the real breakthrough came when Cal realized he didn't need to understand dragon neurology completely. He just needed to understand Tommy's version of it. Over the past weeks, Cal had observed hundreds of examples of Tommy's dragon intuition in action. The way he identified mechanical problems, the patterns he traced with his fingers, the systems he gravitated toward. All of that was his dragon consciousness trying to express itself through limited pathways. Cal could use those observed patterns to calibrate the interface. Instead of guessing what signals Tommy's dragon organs needed, He could base the device on what Tommy was already trying to do. The next morning, Cal presented his plans to Karaleth. "You propose to build a mechanical interface to assist with neurological functions," the Dragon Empress said, studying Cal's diagrams with eyes that had seen technologies beyond human imagination. "Temporarily," Cal emphasized. "Just long enough to help him achieve first flame. After that, his brain should start integrating the systems naturally." "And if your calculations are incorrect? If the device fails or causes damage?" Cal had been dreading this question. "Then I've made things worse instead of better. But Your Majesty, I've looked at every other option. Traditional dragon awakening methods won't work because Tommy's nervous system isn't purely dragon. Human developmental approaches won't work because his brain isn't purely human. This hybrid approach might be the only way." Karaleth studied the designs for a long time. Her cybernetic implants pulsed faster as she processed information at speeds Cal could barely imagine. "Your solution is elegant," she finally said. "You propose to treat his hybrid nature as an advantage rather than a problem. Use human engineering to bridge the gap between incompatible biological systems. Tommy's already shown us he can do things neither pure humans nor pure dragons can do. He just needs help accessing those abilities. The device you describe would need to be built with extraordinary precision. The tolerances are smaller than most human manufacturing can achieve." Cal had thought about this too. "I'll need help from you, from Dr. Webb, probably from other people on the station. This isn't something I can do alone." "You are asking me to risk the only successful hybrid in recorded history on an untested technology built by a mining station mechanic." The words hung in the air between them. Cal felt the weight of what he was proposing. Tommy wasn't just Karaleth's ward or an interesting medical case. He was the bridge between two species, the proof that cooperation was possible, the hope for a future neither humans nor dragons could achieve alone. "Yes, Your Majesty," Cal said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm asking." Karaleth looked toward the playground where Tommy was conducting his daily examination of the station's infrastructure. The boy had found a loose connection in the communication array that morning, guiding Cal to it with the same patient precision he showed for everything mechanical. "Very well," she said. "We will attempt your solution. But understand, human, that if this fails, if Tommy is harmed by your device, the consequences will extend far beyond this station." Cal nodded. He understood the stakes. But as he watched Tommy trace the path of electrical current through a control panel with his small fingers, seeing connections and patterns that would take Cal hours to analyze, he knew they had to try. Tommy deserved the chance to be whole. And maybe, just maybe, human engineering could give him that chance. Empty cargo containers had been stacked around the edges of Bay 7 to create safety barriers, though everyone knew that if something went seriously wrong, sheet metal wouldn't make much difference. Most of the station's population crowded. Behind the protective barriers, watching the small platform Cal had set up in the center of the bay. Tommy sat cross-legged on a simple metal chair, looking tiny and vulnerable with Cal's biomechanical interface attached to his neck and temples. The device was no bigger than a deck of cards, but it had taken 3 weeks and the combined expertise of the entire station to build. Crystalline processors borrowed from the quantum communication array. Biocompatible conductors stripped from the medical bay's finest equipment. Pressure sensors recalibrated from the atmospheric systems. "All readings are stable," Dr. Webb reported from her monitoring station. "Neural activity is within normal parameters for Tommy. The interface is synchronized and ready." Cal knelt beside Tommy's chair, his hands shaking slightly as he made final adjustments to the device. 3 weeks of 18-hour days had led to this moment, and he was terrified that his calculations were wrong. "Okay, buddy," Cal said softly. "Remember what we practiced. You don't have to force anything. Just think about what you want to happen. and let the device help you do it. Tommy looked up at Cal with eyes that seemed older than his 4 years. Over the past weeks, as they had worked together to prepare for this moment, Tommy had become more responsive. Not exactly talkative, but more present somehow, like the promise of finally being able to express what he felt inside had awakened something human in him. The interface will read your intentions and translate them into the signals your dragon organs need, Cal continued. All you have to do is want to breathe fire. The device will handle the technical parts. Tommy nodded once, then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The interface began to glow softly as it detected the first stirrings of intention in Tommy's nervous system. Cal watched the readouts on his portable monitor, seeing the device identify and amplify the weak dragon neural patterns while filtering out the human interference that had blocked them for so long. For a moment, nothing happened. Tommy sat perfectly still, breathing normally, the interface humming quietly as it processed his neural activity. Then the readings changed. "Something's happening," Dr. Webb called out. "I'm seeing activation in organ systems that have never shown activity before." The interface began pulsing faster as it detected Tommy's dragon organs responding to properly formatted neural signals for the first time in his life. Chemical glands activated in sequence. Modified lung chambers began building. Pressure. Neural pathways that had been dormant suddenly blazed with activity. But something was wrong. The readings were climbing too fast. "Cal," Dr. Webb's voice carried a note of warning. "Pressure differentials are exceeding safe parameters." Cal looked at his own readouts and felt his heart skip. The interface was working perfectly, translating Tommy's intentions into precise neural commands. But Tommy's intentions were more powerful than Cal had anticipated. The boy wasn't just trying to breathe fire. He was trying to express years of trapped understanding, frustration, and longing all at once. "Tommy," Cal said urgently, "you need to pull back a little, start smaller." But Tommy's eyes remained closed, his small face showing concentration deeper than anything Cal had seen from him before. The boy was finally accessing his full dragon consciousness for the first time, and the experience was overwhelming in ways Cal hadn't anticipated. The interface readings spiked into dangerous territory. Pressure levels that could rupture organs, chemical concentrations that could poison human tissue, neural activity that approached seizure thresholds. "Shut it down," Dr. Webb shouted. "He's going to hurt himself." Cal's hand moved toward the emergency stop button, then hesitated. On his monitor, he could see something incredible happening. Tommy's dual nervous systems weren't fighting each other anymore. For the first time in his life, human and dragon neural networks were synchronizing, working together instead of creating interference. This was the integration Karaleth had described. The moment when Tommy could become truly whole. If Cal stopped. "The process now, they might never get another chance." "Cal, shut it down," Dr. Webb repeated. Instead, Cal did something else entirely. He reached out and took Tommy's small hand in his own. "Tommy," he said quietly, "I know this feels big. I know you want to let everything out at once. But remember what we learned about mechanical systems. You don't fix everything at once. You start with one connection, test it, make sure it works, then move to the next one." Tommy's grip tightened on Cal's hand. The readings stopped climbing but remained dangerously high. "Think about the playground swing," Cal continued. "You don't push it as hard as you can the first time. You give it a little push, see how it moves, then push it a little harder, step by step." On the monitor, Cal watched Tommy's neural activity begin to stabilize. The boy was learning to control his newly integrated consciousness in real time, using the mechanical thinking that had always been his bridge between worlds. "That's it," Cal said. "Small steps, one system at a time." Tommy's breathing changed, becoming deeper and more controlled. The interface readings settled into patterns that looked sustainable. Chemical production leveled off, pressure differentials stabilized. And then, with no warning except a slight flicker in Tommy's eyes, silver fire erupted from his small mouth. It wasn't the wild, uncontrolled flame Cal had feared. It was precise, beautiful, contained. A stream of plasma that burned with perfect temperature and pressure, lasting exactly as long as Tommy intended and stopping cleanly when he was finished. The cargo bay fell completely silent. Tommy opened his eyes and looked around at all the adults staring at him in amazement. For the first time since Cal had met him, the boy smiled. "Good job, kid," Cal said, his voice rough with emotion. Tommy turned to look at Cal directly, maintaining eye contact in a way he had never been able to do before. When he spoke, his voice was clear and confident. "Thank you for helping me work." The simple sentence hit Cal like a physical blow. Not just because Tommy was speaking clearly for the first time, but because of what he had chosen to say. Not, "Thank you for fixing me," or "Thank you for helping me breathe fire." "Thank you for helping me work." Tommy understood exactly what had happened. His dragon and human sides weren't separate anymore. They were integrated components of a single, functioning system. And like any complex system, they worked better when all the parts were properly connected. Over the following hours, as the station celebrated and Dr. Webb ran test after test, to confirm that Tommy was healthy and stable, Cal watched the boy interact with the world in completely new ways. Tommy could now communicate his mechanical insights clearly, explaining to other engineers how systems could be improved in ways they had never considered. He could play with the other children, but also help them understand how their toys worked, and how to fix them when they broke. But most importantly, Tommy was happy. The frustration and isolation that had marked his early years were gone, replaced by the joy of finally being able to express everything he saw and understood about the world around him. Caroleth approached Cal that evening as the celebration was winding down. "You have given him something I could not," she said quietly. "You have given him the ability to be himself." "I just built an interface," Cal replied. "Tommy did the hard part." "You built more than an interface. You built a bridge between our species. Tommy is proof that humans and dragons can not only coexist but can create something greater together than either could achieve alone." Cal looked across the cargo bay, where Tommy was explaining to a group of fascinated adults how the quantum communication array could be modified to improve signal clarity by 30%. The boy was gesturing enthusiastically, his eyes bright, with the joy of finally being able to share his knowledge. "What happens now?" Cal asked. "Now Tommy grows up," Caroleth said. "He learns to use his abilities to help both our peoples. And perhaps someday he helps other hybrids make the same journey he has made." Other hybrids. Tommy was not the first attempt, only the first success. There are others hidden away, struggling with the same conflicts he faced. Now we know they can be helped. Cal nodded, understanding the magnitude of what they had accomplished. This hadn't just been about helping one child. It had been about proving that the barriers between species could be overcome with patience, understanding, and the right kind of engineering. As the evening wore on and the station gradually returned to normal operations, Cal found himself back in his workshop, already sketching improvements to the biomechanical interface. Tommy wouldn't need it anymore, but other hybrid children might. It felt good to be working on a problem where success meant giving someone the chance to be whole. Cal had fixed a lot of machines in his career, but he had never fixed anything as important as a child's ability to be himself. Tomorrow, Tommy would start learning to use his integrated abilities to solve problems that neither pure humans nor pure dragons could handle alone. But tonight he was just a happy 4-year-old playing with the other children, finally able to be both human and dragon without having to choose between them. Cal smiled and got back to work. There were more hybrid children out there who needed help, and he had a lot of interfaces to build.